Alright, well, here's a quick little update. You can see I've got wax paper and clamps and all kinds of sanders all over the place, and blocks and more clamps. So, Mr. Garrett Carson, who commented on my last video about how it would look stellar to do a herringbone pattern in my motor well, because I'm not a woodworker, I couldn't tell you what herringbone pattern was. I actually had to look it up. I had no idea. But because of your request, what do you think, Mr. Carson? I think it turned out pretty dang awesome. Again, I didn't know what herringbone pattern was, so I had to look it up and figure it out. But these strips are 1 1/4 inches wide. They are 5 inches long. So I just start doing the strip inlay in the bottom of it, and then I cut, you can probably see it right here, 1/8 inch veneers of African mahogany. Again, this is all African mahogany. But I cut these veneers and I lined the inside of my motor well, including back here, all the way across, all with that African mahogany. But I think it turned out really nice. And of course, when I get epoxy over it, and I should have the epoxy, at least an encapsulation coat or two over it, you know, sometime during this video this month, it should look awesome. One of the last things I'm going to do is cut little pieces for the sides of each side of my transom knee, and then I'll bend one over the top and laminate it, so this entire knee will be African mahogany as well. So no more visible marine plywood on the inside like there was, and you remember here is where I cut those little blocks to extend, so that's all hidden now. But it looks beautiful. So again, Garrett Carson, thanks for the suggestion. She turned out gorgeous. And here's a look at it after we have put an encapsulating coat of epoxy on it. Just really, really pretty. It really brought out the grain in the wood. And we'll come over to this side. And now you can see back here, all African mahogany, all to match, no more marine ply. And I've got the sides glued on, little covers for each side, and after this cures up, I'll bend one around the top of this and get it glued on too, African mahogany. They're about, the sides are about a 1/16. I'll probably do a 1/16 also on the top, just African mahogany veneer. But man, turned out so nice. And of course, this isn't as smooth or as glossy or shiny as it's going to be. It's just the very first coat of encapsulating epoxy, but really, really pretty. Motor well's just about done. So this is the result after sanding all of this inside, taking all the bumps out, sanding it, and then applying a second coat of epoxy over the top. You can see the gloss on everything. It's like a mirror inside here. You can see this light stuff is like powder. This is amine blush. See that? Comes off with my finger. So when epoxy cures, it leaves behind a residue known as amine blush. Not all epoxies, but most all epoxies. So before you can apply any more epoxy to this, you have to wash that off, and warm soapy water on a dish rag is all I use. So you can see how glossy this is. There's still little bumps in it here and there, and you can still see defining lines around the edge of some of these. Not all of them, like here, it's all real smooth, but some of them you can still see defining lines of the edges. So I think I'll do probably one more epoxy coat in here to smooth all this out. But anyhow, prior to this, before you do any sanding or anything like that, you'll want to wash the inside to get this amine blush off of there. Wash that all off and then sand it. If you were to sand it, you'll just grind that amine blush into the surface, and then future coats of epoxy won't adhere to it worth a dang. But anyhow, you can see here's a spot that needs to be sanded well and filled in with a little epoxy. But all in all, I'm very, very happy with it. It's incredibly glossy, and it looks very nice inside. So making good progress.
So here's a quick look at what we were just doing there. Just knocking some of this down, all the overhang that we had all the way around. Just getting it close to flush, and then I'll finish it up with sandpaper on a block so it's dead even. But that's what I was using my little block plane for. L.R. Osborne, who's been an awesome fan, always had fantastic compliments and nice things to say about the video. This one's for you. Look, wood shavings, they're everywhere. But that's what we were doing, making good progress. So, quick update. We now have our mounts for the fuel tank in. There's one in front. It is the same width as the plank, 5 inches wide, with a single screw that holds it down. They're 1.25 inches tall. So 5 inch by 1.25 inches, one screw. And basically that holds the tank forward tight to frame 5.5. And then there's one on each side. These are 4 inches long, still 1.25 inches tall. That centers the tank left and right. And then we have these little chrome ties down here. They're bronze, chrome-plated bronze. These guys right here, Sea Dog. Anyhow, so they're just little chrome straps, bronze chromed straps. I bought 2 pair, one for my fuel tank and then one also for my battery box. And then I'm using 1.5 inch nylon webbing or strapping from my local hardware store with the little plastic connectors. There's a quick connect so I can disconnect if I need to, and then the tensioners on each end. But that's it. That basically keeps the tank tight forward against frame 5.5. That keeps it from shifting left to right. And that also keeps it sucked down into position. I've seen several different zips using multiple combinations of either corner blocks and a strap, or strap over the front with corner blocks, or these blocks with a strap. Anyhow, this was the method that I kind of combined after looking at 5 or 6 different zips that all are running the same tank in the same position. This is kind of the culmination of several different zip tank mount ideas that I liked. So that's it. We can get the tank pulled back out, and I'll take a pencil and mark the locations of these blocks on the inside to get their square orientation. So when I remove all the floor planks and epoxy encapsulate them, I'll glue those blocks at the correct angle. Making good progress. So something we've done over the last few days is this, obviously the motor well. This is the back side of the motor well, and where this back board meets the bottom board, I put this strip of African mahogany, and basically it's 1x1 or 1x13/16, and I just cut it in the shape of an angle wood, I guess. If we were working in steel, I'd call it angle iron. But anyhow, so that glues to the back side of the transom wall, and it also glues to the bottom of the transom floor to cap that off. That was the last section that didn't tie the two pieces together. It's done that way. Basically, the sides are tied in well to the transom, and the bottom's tied in well to the sides, but I didn't have this done up here. So I put that in, and then I went over all of my screw holes. You can see here and here. All of the new construction back here for the motor well. It's all been Famo wood plugged. You can see there's 2 over there as well. So that every hole that has a screw in it, again, is all Famo wood plugged. And I sanded everything up tonight. Applied the Famo wood last night. We're getting ready to epoxy encapsulate all the new construction. So it'll be all of the framework for the motor well, the ply box, the outside of it for the motor well, all of my little support brackets for the motor well, as well as our speaker mounts. Those need to be epoxy encapsulated. Our 4th batten over there, that needs to be epoxy encapsulated. So all of the new construction I need to get epoxy on, including the dash. I think that's going to come up here pretty quick. So I need to get that encapsulated in epoxy, sanded off really, really well, and then a second coat of epoxy. So with any luck, the dash will be every bit as glossy as back here. And again, before
before I do the finishing coats on all of this, I'll resand the insides of my carlings, the seat backs, the dash, all back in here. That'll all get a second sand job. As you can probably see, it's not a very level finish. Let me get my hand reflection, and you can see all the bumps and imperfections in the surface. But just like the motor well, when I sand all of those imperfections off and make that smooth, the next coat of epoxy, it'll just look like glass. So just like the outside of the hull, exactly the same. So that's where we're at. We've got all of our screw holes plugged. We're getting ready to epoxy encapsulate all the new construction. So making good progress. So we now have epoxy encapsulation on all of our motor well framing and support blocks and the outside of the motor well. Again, both sides, the face, the bottom, all of my blocking up the sides, all of the blocking underneath. So all new construction, including the speaker mounts, all 4 of the speaker mounts, one over there, one up here, one over here. That's all done, epoxy encapsulated. The 4th batten, both sides, the bottom and the blocks, it's all encapsulated in epoxy. Our through holes through the frame, those are all encapsulated in epoxy now. Again, speaker mounts. The blocks for the Pioneer media receiver mounts, the mounting blocks, those are all encapsulated. And of course the dash. And you know, this African mahogany comes in several different shades. And I can show you for instance here. This is a great example. This is about average as far as what you find for African mahogany. It's like a medium brown. This is pretty average. But then at the same time, right beside it on my shear lamination, you can see this is a really light colored African mahogany. And then right beside that is an incredibly dark African mahogany. I'm not bleaching any of this stuff. I'm just coating it in epoxy like I get it. So the color it is the color it is. I'm not manipulating color by bleaching or anything like that. So I had some fear when I coated the back side of this dash prior to mounting it. It looked gray. It looked like a weird, funny, really dark grayish color. It was strange. It's a beautiful grain, but I thought, uh-oh, this is going to stick out like a sore thumb when I epoxy it. It's not going to match anything else in the boat. Well, you know, I don't know if it was just the light at the time or the angle or what, but obviously we have the first encapsulating coat of epoxy on the dash. You can see some gloss to it. Again, it's going to be 2, 3, 4 times glossier than that when it's done, but the color match is like spot on to my carling. I just could not be happier after I started applying the epoxy over the top and just hoping for the best. It's such a fantastic color match between the carling and the dash. So I couldn't be happier. But that's where we are at the moment. So, you know, let this cure for, I don't know, 3, 4 days, however long. And then I'll rough all of this up. And like I talked about before, I'm going to go ahead and rough all of the dash up, both carlings, that side away from me, this side towards me, and the front cockpit seat back. I'll sand all of this, and then I'll do a second epoxy encapsulation coat over all of it to get it really smooth and glossy. And then, you know, we'll let that cure up, and I'll do the same back here, just like I talked about. I'll sand the rear cockpit dash, the rear cockpit carlings, and the rear cockpit seat back. It'll all get sanded and coated in epoxy, again, to take the lumps and bumps out and make everything nice and glossy. And like I stated, you know, in an older video, you can't leave epoxy bare. So I have to decide after I've got everything smooth, you know, am I going to
varnish this interior stuff that you'll see? Am I going to have it sprayed in automotive clear coat when I have the outside and the top deck sprayed? Maybe I'll come up with some sort of polyurethane clear that can be, you know, rolled and tipped on. Yeah, I haven't really decided what I'm going to do as far as protecting the epoxy in the cockpit areas, as well as the floor. The floor is going to get at least 2 coats of epoxy, but again, I'll have to protect at least the top and 2 sides of it. I won't worry about the bottom because it won't be exposed to sunlight, but I'll have to protect the face and both sides of each plank after they're epoxy encapsulated. So I have to decide again, am I going to use you know, varnish and go for more of a traditional finish? Am I going to use some sort of 1 part poly clear over it? I haven't really decided. Maybe I'll have those sprayed in automotive clear coat. I'm really not sure what I'm going to do just yet for the interior UV protection to protect the epoxy. I know what I'm going to do on the exterior. It's definitely going to get automotive clear coat. The entire top deck when it's all done, and the exterior of the hull will all be a 2-part automotive clear coat, probably a PPG or just something higher up in the brands. Again, when it comes to the final gloss finish on this boat, I'm going to spare no expense. I want it to look beautiful. I want it to look wet when it's completely dry. You know, I just want it to be uber high gloss. So I may end up, when the time comes to have the exterior of the boat sprayed, I may end up pulling all of this stuff out and having him spray that as well. I think it would look beautiful, but who knows? I'm not sure which direction I'm going to go with that yet. But anyhow, all of our new construction, with the exception of the floorboards now, is all coated in epoxy. It's all protected and pretty. So again, the dash turned out really nice, and this is still not as glossy as it's going to be when it's done. But we're making great progress. I'm not sure which direction I'm going to go now. I still have, I don't know, 5 or 6 different directions I could go at this point in time. But we're making fantastic progress. Chugging along. So we now have the second coat of epoxy on the dash. And you can see it is substantially smoother. Much higher gloss. You can see the floor reflecting in it. So I went ahead and I sanded all the dash, both carlings over there and right here, and the front cockpit rear seat back. And now you can see the gloss on that rear seat back. It is like a mirror. Of course, this is still wet, but so long as we've got decently warm temperature and low humidity, it will dry this glossy. It will cure up or harden this glossy. So it's looking pretty dang shiny. Pretty good. We're getting quite the gloss on it now. But second coat inside the front cockpit is done. So now we're getting ready to prep and do the rear cockpit. And you can probably see the difference. Hopefully you can see the difference. You can see all the bumps and rough. Same back here. You can see it's all rough and scaly looking. And this is exactly what the front cockpit rear seat back looked like. It looked exactly like this, for bumps and just not too pretty. Prior to sanding it and epoxy encapsulating it, now it's like a mirror. So, making good progress, knocking things off the list day by day. Alright, so we now have this rear cockpit area, frame 2, both carlings and the rear cockpit seat back all sanded, and the second coat of epoxy is on it, and you can see the gloss now on the carling. Of course, this is still wet, but we'll come over here and you can probably see the gloss on this carling, and pretty dang shiny. And then we'll come around and we'll look at the rear cockpit seat back. You can see the reflection of the floor in it. I mean, it's like a dang mirror. And then we'll come up again, and you probably remember this frame used to be really bumpy and rough and felt like sandpaper, and now you can see the reflection in it. It's like a mirror.
Of course, you know, this is still wet, so it's going to lose a little bit of its gloss. It's a little warmer today than it was when I did the front cockpit. Humidity's about the same, so it'll probably end up being just a hair bit shinier than the front cockpit. This is the front cockpit now after it's sat for a day. This stuff's completely hard, but you can still see my reflection in it. So I mean, it's pretty smooth, pretty shiny. And again, this isn't the final coat on anything. You can see that one. Let's look at the front cockpit, rear seat back. So I mean, it's pretty shiny. So I'm very, very happy with how the second coat's turned out in here on the dash, the carlings, and the seat back. And I'm anticipating the rear cockpit turning out just the same because it's almost identical conditions today, slightly warmer, but nice and shiny. So we're making fantastic progress. All right, here's something I was working on tonight. You can see this is the back side of our dash right here, and this is our ignition switch. So this thing it's a 3/4 inch hole that we drilled in the front here for the switch to go through, and then it has like a beauty ring nut on the front, and underneath there's a real thin nut, and you tighten the two together to pinch it to the dash. The problem is, no matter how tight I got that inside nut in there, this thing would still spin the entire thing instead of the key turning on, like so. So there's the run position, then there's the spring-loaded start, just like on a vehicle. Anyhow, this switch is a little stiff, so every time you go to try to turn it on, the entire housing would rotate, and that does no good. I don't want to have to reach behind the dash with one hand and hold the switch while I turn the key with the other. So I built this little bracket right here, and you can see there's a hair bit of a gap here, and same on this side. The bottom of it is beveled at an angle to follow, because this ignition switch is mounted on the dash on 10 degrees. So I had to angle the bottom of this U shape 10 degrees as well, so that it fit flush across it. And I left a little bit of gap, and there are 2 stainless screws. We'll see if we can get underneath there. Yeah, there you can kind of see them. Anyhow, 2 stainless screws, they go up into the bottom of frame 4 and pinch that together. Basically, it pinches you know, the switch in place. It locks it into the dash so it can't rotate. So there it is. So that's what I was working on tonight. Look at the gloss on that dash. Making good progress. So here's a gigantic mess from a little side project I was working on while various parts of the boat are curing and things like that. So here's my mess, and here is what I was building. A Gary the Snail disc sander. Why Gary the Snail? Well, because I didn't have a piece big enough for a bed on this out of anything else other than some old bookcases from my kids' room. So Gary the Snail. But basically, it's a 3rd horse motor. It was given to me. I took what used to be a 2-inch diameter aluminum pulley and turned it down in my lathe for a hub. I took a piece of 3/4 inch marine ply that I had left over and drilled a center hole and cut this. It's a 9-inch diameter. I still have to go buy sanding discs for it. But basically, I mounted that hub to the center of it. Spun this thing up. I took a chisel and machined off the edge here, so it's perfectly round. And then you can see this dark spot, no dark spot, little dark spot. So I spun this thing up, and then I took a chisel across the face of it here to flush it up. So it has less than a 1/2 thousandth of wobble up and down and in and out. The thing is incredibly true for the crude manner that I used to kind of true it up. But I built this just to clamp into my vise. The table's non-adjustable. It's set at 90, so I put these forward screws in and set my square up against it, and I ended up having to shim this edge up about a 1/16 to get this to be perfectly 90. But there it is. It's ready to use. I've got to order some 80 grit discs for it. They're about $1.40 a piece, come in a 10 pack. So at the moment I'm in this thing. Here's the base look. We'll drop down underneath. You can see where it clamps in to my vise. But I'm in this Gary the Snail disc sander, $0 right now. Absolutely nothing. It was all crap I had laying around. And I've been wanting one of these for a while. So we'll go ahead and fire it up. And firing it up means plugging it in. So there it is. It's incredibly quiet. Very, very, very true. But we now have, when I get some sandpaper, a disc sander. So I'm super excited about that. We'll go ahead and get it unplugged. And you'll hear the motor kick out in just a second. There it is. Pretty dang cool. And you know, it gives me a smile every time I'm going to use it. So thanks, Gary. All right. It's officially June 1st, 2016. For the month of May, we went up 24.5 hours. We went up $57.94. So that 24.25 hours brings us up to 449.75 hours into the zip. And the $57.94 brings us up to a grand total of $5,930.87 invested. So I broke down what we did this month. You can see there was 7.25 hours on epoxy, 14.25 on deck framing, 3/4 on electrical, and 1.75 on mechanical. So if we come over here, you can see our electrical now. That 0.75 brought us up to 8.25 total. On the mechanical, the 1.75 brought us up to 3 hours total. On the deck framing, which was 14.25 hours, that brought us up to deck framing 81 hours even on deck framing. And the epoxy coat, 7.5 hours, that brought us up to 25.75 hours. So we're making good progress. We're about a month and a half away from 2 years on the boat. So we're just knocking things down. We're in the same spot we were just a little bit ago, where the front cockpit and rear cockpit have been fully encapsulated in epoxy. So we're getting ready to move on to the next thing. And I still, again, I don't know what that's going to be. I have still about 4 or 5 different directions I can go, but we're making great progress. Again, I love months like this. We almost matched last month's hours. We missed it by 15 minutes of a dead match. So went up decent hours. Didn't cost me a ton of money. I love months like this. But thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, rate, and comment. And we'll catch you on the next update of Building the Zip.